The Book of Esther is the second of two books carrying a female title. And we know what the other book is, don't we? What's the name of the other book? Ruth. All right. And so Esther and Ruth are the only two books that has female titles. One of the things about the Book of Esther is that there were some concerns about it as it relates to the canonizing of the book. And the main concern for that was the fact that the book makes no mention of God. So there is no mention of God in the Book of Esther. So how do we attribute it to God? We are going to see how that comes into play. All right. We're not going to read the entire. We're not going to read the entire book. Because I take it that it has been read. I take it that it has been read, and so we're just going to go into it. All right. Our subject title: The Exploits of Queen Esther. Exploits of Queen Esther, a daring act of faith, courage, and sacrifice. A daring act of faith, courage, and sacrifice. In the Book of Esther, we can see the work of God. We can see the work of God taking place from the very onset. From the beginning of the chapter, we see God at work in this book, even though his name is not mentioned. So, under the reign of Xerxes, Esther became queen. The king succeeded his father, was Darius, in BCE 486, and he reigned until his death in BCE 465, and he was born BCE 519. Keeping in mind the BC calendar, it goes down rather than up. What we have now is ascending. In those days, the years work in a descending order. All right. The king Xerxes died at the hands of members of his courts. Also with him was his eldest son. And this is important because now his second son took reign after his death. The Xerxes came into the reign after Darius the Great, his father, had died, and it was quite an empire. It was quite an empire, had 127 provinces, and it was from Kush to India, and the capital was Susa. That was the capital, and that is in modern day Iraq, right? Either Iraq or Iran. We have it there. So that was the capital of the Persian Empire, right? Modern day Iran. So it was the capital of the Persian Empire. Had a, was well spread out. This particular city went through many hands, and it went through many rebuilding, because it was constantly destroyed, was constantly conquered, was constantly destroyed and rebuilt. And Cambyses was he was the king who recaptured it after it was destroyed, after it was rebuilt, sorry. And then after him, then you have Darius. And then after Darius, then you had Xerxes, who became king. In fact, he was the second child of Darius. He kind of skipped his other child for in favor of this particular son. So Cyrus was the one who captured, right? So Cyrus is the one who captured the city, and then Darius expanded the city. He developed it. He developed it in such a way that it had all the great monuments, and he made it look like a capital. And then Cambyses, right? He was the one who made it the capital. So the order was Cyrus, who captured it. Then Darius succeeded Cyrus. He expanded it. He developed the empire. He expanded the empire. When he passed away, then his second son Xerxes came into the throne. Susa was a very influential and important place. It was described as the intellectual, almost the intellectual and religious capital. It was the prime area where culture was developed and spread across the wider empire. So it was very, very important, very, very influential in the whole scheme of things. So that makes it even that shed some light on why the events, especially in this first chapter, is so important, because the city itself carried great weight and significance in the running of the empire, in the transforming or shaping of the empire. And sitting at the top of that shaping of civilization was the king, because everything was, central to him, was central to him. So the city was one that allowed the king to have a place where he can rule from. In fact, one of the documents said that it was Darius's favorite place of all there were other capitals, but this particular one was his favorite. It was considered the intellectual, cultural, and religious capital. All right. We're going to jump to the events of. So let's go to go to the Bible, and what we are going to read, is from verse 9. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. On the seventh day, when the king was in high spirit from wine, he commanded his eunuchs to go and to bring before him Queen Esther wearing her royal robe in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come, and the king became furious and burned with anger. This, my friends, was a significant event. That little transaction was a significant transaction that would really change the landscape of the city and influence the empire. That very simple decision from Queen Vashti triggered a train of events that we will look at that unfolds in the following chapters. We see that after she rejected the command, what the king did, he called a conference, an emergency meeting, if we were to describe it that way. And he invited the nobles. He invited in verse 13, and this is an important statement. So he invited the law minds, the legal luminaries. They were versed on matters of law and justice. He spoke with the wise men who understood the times. Wise men understood the times. And then he also spoke with his close friends. And these three groups, well, one personal advice from his close friends, and then you have those who were now looking at it from a legal standpoint. They were now scrutinizing her behavior and her decision from a legal standpoint to see what can be done and how to remedy the situation from legally. But the group that I take interest in and how the author describes them are the wise men who understood the times. Wise men who understood the times. You see, it's important for us to wrap our minds around the cultural events and the atmosphere. You see, it was not only a matter of law that they were dealing with. The law can be dealt with within the city, within the authorities of the city, but Vashti's behavior had greater significance to the well-being of not just the kingship, but also the entire province. When we go down to verse 16, when you go down to verse 16, when the king, the verdict came in from a legal standpoint, they said, well, by law, she was wrong by disobeying the king. So she was wrong for disobeying the king. But what the nobles identified caused me to believe that her actions would have greater impact than just a matter of breaking the law. And here's what they said. So fine, in verse 16 to 18, she says, okay, fine, in verse 16, she was wrong. But they went on to say, and this is something that we shouldn't trivialize. They went on to say, but against all the nobles, these are individuals of stature, and they are rulers in the different provinces. Her actions will have implications for the people of the provinces run by the king. So we realize that the implication of her action is not just from a micro level, but it has a meso and macro level impact. So it's going to affect the relationship between the king and his queen and the city, but it's also going to affect how the rulers rule in the other provinces. And it's also going to impact the relationship between genders. In fact, the Queen Vashti, in the minds of some feminists, she is the mother of feminism. She's the mother of feminism. She was the first to revolt against misogyny, the rulership of the man. So, but that was an ill-advised decision. Why? Why was it an ill-advised decision? Well, politically, it was ill-advised. Politically, it was ill-advised. We see the king throwing this party. We see the king throwing this party when we go back to verse 4. So when you go back to verse 4, he threw a party for half the year, 180 days. All right? When that finished, he continued that party for 7 more days. And during this time, what he did was put on display the wealth of the kingdom, which kind of presents the idea of the strength of the kingdom. The strength of the kingdom. And I believe one of the reasons for that is that this particular king was militarily weak. He did not command the same kind of respect that those who went before him had. He did not drive that kind of fear. He did not have the military wits, and he did not have the respect of the leaders, and so he had to find a way. He had to find a way to almost buy influence, and I believe that this prolonged party was an effort to buy influence because he was a weak leader. He was a weak leader. Um, in my reading, I didn't see much that he would have contributed to the advancement or the expansion of the kingdom. In fact, under him, the influence of the empire started to diminish. So under him, the influence of the empire started to diminish. And so my belief is that this expansive celebration and display of power was to buy influence, to buy support, to buy loyalty. The Bible describes him as a liberal king, which is contrary to the traditional rulership of the king. When we look at the verses 4 through to 7, you realize that people could do as they please. He gave them the freedom to do as they please, drink as they want, and do whatever they want, which is not necessarily consistent with a strong king allowing people to have a free reign in their kingdom. And so I think he was weak, and this became a political liability. In that, where you have a weak king, the kingdom becomes a focal point for invasion. Keep in mind, in those days, unlike what we have now, where well, except for the Russia-Ukraine situation, where you now have people living independent, sovereign nations. In those days, military might was important, and if you don't have a strong military, well, you're subject to being taken over. That's how the Persian Empire spread, by conquering other nations. So being politically weak means that the provinces and the empire is at risk of being attacked. So that's from the external. Being politically weak as well also drives internal ambition to dethrone the king, as we see with David and his son, where his son purpose in his heart that he is going to dethrone his father, he's going to kill him, he's going to dethrone his father. So that's not uncommon. And Xerxes was actually killed by people within his temple courts. So militarily or politically, he was weak. When you look at from a military standpoint, that was weak as well. He could not command, as mighty as the empire's army was. He was not able to lead them into victory. In fact, during his reign, he was brutally and shamefully defeated by the Greeks. He decided to take on the Greeks, and they really decimated them. So, from a military standpoint, he was also weak. Now, couple that with the behavior of his wife. The Bible tells us if a man cannot govern his house, then he pretty much cannot lead his family. The security of a family or a nation is dependent on in Xerxes' case, is dependent on his kingship. Strong leadership is necessary then, and it is necessary now. He had 127 provinces under him. So, not being able to command his own household meant that he could not command the nations under him. And that is one of the things that Vashti's action brought forth. His deficiency as a leader. What was happening at the time for Xerxes when he came onto the throne? He had there was an alliance with the Persian Empire and with Egypt and Babylon. One of the first things he did was to remove himself. So they had an arrangement, both Babylon and Egypt were independent countries, but they had an agreement that the king of the Persian Empire would also be their king. So they had that arrangement. And Darius worked with that arrangement until he died. But what Xerxes did was he broke that arrangement and removed himself as king from both Babylon and Egypt, which is evidence of his inability to really lead with character and with wisdom. So now his wife disrespected him because that's what it amounted to. And that's why it was a significant act on her part, because all that was happening at the time, his defeat plus his breaking up of relationships with allies, and his own, in my view, lack of confidence. His own lack of confidence as a leader made him very vulnerable, and his wife did not make it any better, wasn't making it any better for him by rejecting his command. Why was her attitude and behavior problematic for him? Is that she did not show much regard for him as a person and for him as a king. And the display of that attitude was not behind closed doors. was not behind closed doors. It was for the world to see. It was for the world to see. So this man, this king, has now been humiliated. He has now been humiliated before the entire Persian kingdom. So that was one factor there in terms of problematic issue, issue for the king. The disregard of him and his office by his wife and the act of vitriolic behavior, where she has showed no respect for him. The other thing is her actions made him a political liability. Her actions made him a political liability. Before all the leaders of the day, the man who they are now looking to provide leadership has been humiliated by his wife. And if the queen can humiliate the king before everyone else, what is going to happen to the other leaders? What's going to happen to the other leaders? How will their family treat them? How will their spouses treat them? And that was a real issue. Because the environment was of such, if the leadership is undermined by their household or by the nation, then they become easy targets for outsiders. The geopolitical consequences come in there, where because of mediocre military strength, they were sitting ducks for invasion. Can you imagine if news go out that the queen humiliated the king before the entire empire? Vicious rulers are going to step in and to take hold. One of the things that I don't think Vashti took into consideration is that, fine, you can disrespect your husband, but in the time of war, and in those days, war was prevalent. In the time of war, these husbands and sons will have to provide the military backing in terms of protection, in terms of defending of the city. And this is one of the, one of the things with feminism, not bashing the movement, and liberalism, is that they don't tend to fully think about the long-term consequences and possibilities of certain actions. And her behavior might have brought her some fame, might have brought her some glory, but what it did was undermine the integrity of the strength of the nation. And we have to be mindful of that. There was also the other concern, which the nobles highlighted, and that is the concern of civil unrest. One of the reasons why Xerxes removed himself and broke the relationship between Egypt and Babylon was because in those nations there arose a contesting or challenging of the government, the authorities of the day. So there was some form of unrest taking place, and he did not want to be a part of that. That's not a good reason as a leader where there is unrest. As a leader, you have to lead in finding a solution. So him running was not a good justification. But nevertheless, there was some unrest there. And so he took away, and I guess the thought was to protect the provinces, to protect the empire. So it's best we just leave that. But with Vashti's rejecting or opposing of his requests, it now created the possibility of a civil unrest within the empire. So it offered that opportunity for civil unrest within the empire. And the civil unrest would pretty much be between men and women. That battle, that gender battle. And gender wars have no winners. Gender wars have no winners. That's why God created it in such a way that male and female work together because we are compatible. That's why God did not make us incompatible, but he made us compatible so we can work together. Wherever you have a gender war taking place, as we are seeing in today's society, as the nobles highlighted, you're going to have disrespect and you're going to have discord. Nobody benefits in gender war. So those are some of the things that are problematic regarding her behavior. The king, I don't think he was the best king, but nevertheless, he was still king. And for others to respect him, you have to show your respect. There is one other thing that I want to identify in this particular chapter, though it's not mentioned. Though it's not mentioned. And that is the work of God in this whole scheme of things. One of the cultural challenges that was being faced was that of a changing in religion. And I think I made some mention of it regarding the breaking of relationships between Xerxes and Egypt and Babylon. And one theory is that Xerxes was now embracing a monolithic religion, whereas others were, multiple gods. He was now embracing a monolithic religion, which we're going to talk about a little. And where you have religion or the whole concept of supremacy, godly supremacy, please understand that God Almighty is not going to sit down and not get involved. It's going to sit down and not get involved. There was a religion that was a new religion that started at the time, Devas, and Xerxes started to embrace that. But that religion, the theos of that religion, the god of that religion, was actually a demon. So now he considered himself an adversary for an advocate, sorry, for this new religion, which is going to stir up a religious war within the empire. It's going to stir up a religious war within the empire. So that, in a nutshell, is what was taking place in chapter 1, where the author gives us insight into who Xerxes was, what were some of the issues of the day, and some of the implications, of the actions of Vashti. Next week, we're going to go into chapter 2, and we're going to start looking at chapter 2. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is just an overview of chapter 1. So we look forward to starting chapter 2 next week. All right, God bless you.